Tonight, I want to begin in a place that has not seen war in generations. A cafe in Warsaw, a train station in Berlin, a parliament building in Brussels. For decades, Europe believed it had solved the problem of war, not perfectly, not globally, but internally. Borders softened, currencies unified, armies downsized, defense budgets cut, energy intertwined, trade flourished. The European project was built on a radical assumption: interdependence would make war obsolete. Then came February 24th, 2022, and suddenly Europe was not a post-war continent, it was a frontline continent. Missiles were landing just beyond its eastern border. Refugees were crossing into its cities by the millions. Energy supplies were being weaponized. Cyber attacks were spreading. The illusion of permanent peace shattered, and Europe had to decide what it really was: an economic bloc or a geopolitical power. The answer is still unfolding. In the first weeks of the invasion, Europe responded with unity few thought possible. Sanctions were passed rapidly, airspace closed, assets frozen, weapons shipped, billions in aid mobilized. Countries that once hesitated now acted. Germany, long cautious about military engagement, announced a historic rearmament program, a Zeitenwende, a turning point. Defense spending surged. Poland accelerated procurement. Baltic states fortified borders. Finland and Sweden applied to join NATO. Neutrality gave way to urgency, and this was not gradual evolution. It was shock-induced transformation. Ukraine forced Europe to confront uncomfortable truths. That dependency on Russian gas was a vulnerability. That defense capacity had eroded. That deterrence required investment. That American security guarantees could not be taken for granted forever. The European Union, historically cautious in matters of hard power, moved decisively. It financed weapons deliveries, it coordinated sanctions, it managed refugee resettlement, it integrated Ukraine economically even as war raged. It acted less like a bureaucracy and more like a political union. 8 million Ukrainian refugees crossed into Europe in the early months. They were housed, educated, integrated into labor markets. Healthcare systems expanded, communities adapted. This was one of the largest population movements in modern European history, handled with remarkable speed, but not without strain. Housing markets tightened, schools expanded classrooms, budgets stretched, politics shifted, solidarity tested. Some countries absorbed the impact more easily than others. Eastern Europe carried disproportionate burdens. Tensions simmered beneath unity. Energy was the immediate crisis. Europe cut dependence on Russian gas at record speed, diversified suppliers, built terminals, accelerated renewables, reduced consumption. This was economic surgery without anesthesia, expensive, painful, necessary. Inflation spiked, industries restructured, consumers adjusted, but the transition held. Politically, Ukraine's war exposed divisions within Europe. Hungary resisted certain sanctions. France debated strategic autonomy. Germany wrestled with military culture. Italy navigated domestic politics. Yet the overarching framework endured. Consensus remained. This is not trivial. The European Union operates by agreement. 27 sovereign states must align. That alignment held under stress. That is strength. Ukraine's candidacy for EU membership accelerated. Reforms were demanded, anti-corruption measures implemented, judicial systems scrutinized. Integration deepened even before peace. Europe signaled that Ukraine's future lies inside its structures, not outside. That decision reshapes the continent permanently. But enlargement is complex. It requires funding, institutional reform, budget reallocation, political will. Some members worry about costs, others worry about precedent. Yet the trajectory is clear. Ukraine is not drifting east, it is anchoring west. Militarily, Europe has changed profoundly. Defense industries expanded production. Joint procurement initiatives emerged. Strategic autonomy debates intensified. The EU began coordinating defense investments more closely. While NATO remains primary for collective defense, Europe is building complementary capacity. This dual structure reflects a new reality. Security cannot be outsourced entirely. The United States remains indispensable, but Europe must carry more weight. Ukraine's war accelerated that realization. Public opinion shifted too. In many countries, support for Ukraine remains strong, but fatigue grows, energy costs linger, inflation bites, populist parties exploit frustration. Some argue for negotiation at any cost, others demand continued resistance. Democracy debates openly. That is Europe's nature. Its challenge is sustaining unity through electoral cycles. Another shift is strategic identity. For decades, Europe defined itself by soft power, diplomacy, trade, human rights, regulation. Now it must integrate hard power, deterrence, defense, military spending. Balancing these identities is delicate. Too much militarization risks eroding values. Too little risks vulnerability. Ukraine has forced Europe to grow up geopolitically. That growth is uneven, but visible. Meanwhile, Russia's relationship with Europe has collapsed. Energy ties severed, trade reduced, cultural exchanges curtailed, airspace closed. Diplomacy, minimal, a continental rupture. This may define European politics for a generation. Trust is broken. Rebuilding it will take decades, if ever. Ukraine's war also strengthened transatlantic ties. The US and EU coordinated sanctions and aid closely. Intelligence sharing deepened. Defense cooperation intensified. For now, the Atlantic Alliance is solid, but political changes in Washington could alter that. Europe is aware and preparing. The war has made Europe more serious, more strategic, more cohesive in crisis, but also more anxious, because the front line is closer than it has been in decades, and because the outcome remains uncertain. If Ukraine prevails and integrates fully, Europe expands its democratic zone. If the war freezes or fragments, instability lingers at its edge. Either way, Europe is transformed. It is no longer a post-war experiment sheltered by history. It is a geopolitical actor in a contested world. Ukraine did not just defend itself, it awakened a continent, and that awakening is still unfolding. To understand how deeply Ukraine's war has changed Europe, you have to understand Germany. Not its economy, not its exports, not its political parties, its memory. For nearly 80 years after World War II, Germany built its identity around one principle: never again. Never again militarism, never again aggression, never again unchecked power, never again war as policy. This was not rhetoric, it was institutional, embedded in law, in education, in culture, in foreign policy. The Bundeswehr was designed for defense, not projection. Military deployments were controversial. Defense budgets were restrained, arms exports tightly regulated. Pacifism was not weakness, it was moral reconstruction. After 1945, Germany chose restraint as legitimacy, and it worked. Germany became Europe's economic engine, a diplomatic broker, a consensus builder, a civilian power. Security was outsourced to NATO, to the United States, to alliances. Germany paid, others protected. That division of labor endured for decades, until Ukraine. When Russia invaded in 2022, Berlin froze, not out of indifference, out of history. Sending weapons east revived ghosts. Tanks rolling toward Russia was unthinkable. The political instinct was caution, delay, dialogue, incrementalism. Germany hesitated on arms deliveries, debated publicly, consulted endlessly, was criticized fiercely by allies, by Ukraine, by its own citizens. But then something changed. On February 27, 2022, 3 days after the invasion, Chancellor Olaf Scholz addressed the Bundestag. He announced a Zeitenwende, a turning point. Germany would invest $100 billion in its military, raise defense spending to 2% of GDP, supply weapons to Ukraine, rearm, modernize, reassess. It was seismic, comparable to reunification, comparable to NATO accession, comparable to the post-war settlement, a psychological rupture. Germany publicly accepted that pacifism alone could not deter aggression, that economic interdependence had failed, that diplomacy without power was fragile. This was not militarism. It was reluctant realism. Implementation was slow. Procurement bottlenecks, bureaucracy, coalition politics, public skepticism. Germany struggled to translate commitment into capability. Old systems were outdated, stockpiles depleted, factories unprepared. The Bundeswehr had been underfunded for years. Rebuilding takes time, and Germany learned that painfully. Each tank delivery, each missile system, each artillery shipment was debated, challenged, delayed, but they happened. Gradually, reluctantly, decisively, Leopard tanks, Iris-T systems, Patriot batteries, ammunition, training, logistics. Germany became one of Ukraine's largest supporters, not because it wanted to lead, because it felt it had to. Public opinion evolved. Initial hesitation gave way to broad support. Images from Bucha, Mariupol, Kharkiv shifted perception. This was not a distant conflict. It was European history repeating. Silence felt complicit. Civil society mobilized. Demonstrations supported Ukraine. Refugees were welcomed. Communities integrated newcomers. Memory translated into solidarity. Yet tensions remained. Germany's peace movement is strong. Anti-nuclear activism, disarmament traditions, Ostpolitik legacies, dialogue with Moscow. These currents did not disappear. They clashed with security demands. Public debates were intense, televised, personal, moral. Should Germany send tanks? Could that escalate? Was restraint ethical? Was intervention dangerous? These debates were democracy working, painfully but openly. Another shift, energy. Germany's reliance on Russian gas had been profound. Nord Stream symbolized partnership. It collapsed overnight. Germany scrambled to build LNG terminals, reopened coal plants, extended nuclear reactors, subsidized consumers. Energy security replaced climate purity. Trade-offs were accepted. This was another break with orthodoxy. Germany learned that values require infrastructure. Geopolitically, Berlin began coordinating more closely with Eastern Europe. Poland, Baltics, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Trust had been strained, history complicated. Ukraine realigned priorities. Germany listened more, led less, consulted more. Another legacy, defense industry revival. Factories expanded, orders increased. Joint projects accelerated, supply chains rebuilt. Germany re-entered the arms manufacturing arena seriously, with regulation, with oversight, but with scale. This changes Europe's military landscape long-term strategically. Germany also recalibrated relations with China. Risk assessments, supply chain diversification, investment screening, dual-use technology restrictions. Ukraine taught Berlin that economic dependence can be exploited. That lesson extended east, not just north. This is strategic maturation, not isolation, resilience. But the transformation is incomplete. Budget fights persist. Public fatigue grows. Populist parties question support. Coalition politics complicate decisions. Germany remains cautious. It will never be a hawkish power. That is structural, cultural, but it is no longer complacent. That is the change. Perhaps the most profound shift is generational. Young Germans are growing up in a Europe at war. They see soldiers, refugees, military debates, defense spending, NATO exercises. The post-war illusion of permanent peace is gone. A new realism is emerging. Not cynical, sobering. Germany's transformation matters because Germany anchors Europe. When Berlin moves, the continent follows. When Berlin hesitates, others stall. Ukraine forced Berlin to move, not triumphantly, not eagerly, but decisively. The end of post-war pacifism does not mean the end of restraint. It means restraint now includes readiness. Moral memory now includes deterrence. And peace is defended, not assumed. Germany did not abandon its past. It reinterpreted it. Never again now means never again allow aggression to succeed, and that is a historic redefinition, still unfolding, under pressure, in real time. War announces itself with explosions, with sirens, with smoke, with headlines. But its most lasting impact often arrives quietly, on trains, on buses, on foot, carrying suitcases, plastic bags, children, pets, memories. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe did not just face a military crisis. It faced the largest refugee movement on the continent since World War II, and it happened almost overnight. In the first weeks of the war, millions of Ukrainians fled west, mothers with children, elderly grandparents, students, disabled people, pets and carriers, entire lives compressed into backpacks. Border crossings in Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania became humanitarian corridors. Volunteers handed out soup, blankets, SIM cards, toys, translation services. Railways offered free passage. Homes opened. Hotels emptied. Sports halls converted. A spontaneous civil response emerged before governments could organize. It was one of the fastest mass mobilizations of solidarity in modern history. And it mattered, because in 2015, when refugees from Syria and elsewhere arrived, Europe fractured, borders closed, parties radicalized, trust eroded. That crisis reshaped politics for a decade. Many feared 2022 would repeat it. It did not, at least not immediately. The European Union activated its temporary protection directive for the first time. This granted Ukrainians immediate residency work rights, healthcare, education, social benefits, no asylum backlog, no detention camps, no years of uncertainty, instant legal status. It was revolutionary and revealing. It showed what Europe can do when it chooses to. Within months, more than 8 million Ukrainians had entered EU countries. Poland alone absorbed millions. Germany took over 1 million, Czech Republic, Spain, Italy, France.